while, so I just thought I would catch up with y'all. I think I still had a few subscribers. Facebook censors the crap out of me. X, which I deleted, censors the crap out of me. I just thought I would try this again. It's been a while. How's everybody? I hope everybody's enjoying the biodigital convergence. I had put a different name. I had actually used the title of this book as the name in the description of this video, and it wouldn't let me go live, so that's weird. The Evil Twins of Technocracy and Transhumanism by Patrick Wood. I finished it a week ago, I guess. It's a really good book. It's a really good overview. It misses some stuff, I think, ideologically speaking, but you can't cover everything in the course of a book, but he covers some of the key points, and this is the key point that I think people need to understand. In 1992, at the UN summit in Rio, that's when all of this started. It started even before with the Brundtland Report in 1987. And this is when and where Agenda 21 and Agenda 2030 and the concurrent Great Reset and the Fourth Industrial Revolution and the Internet of Bodies and the Internet of Things, these things were all envisioned at that exact moment in time. So this has been happening for a long time, and it's based upon a worldview. And that worldview suggests that the correct model for interpreting reality is materialist atheism. Now, I'm agnostic, so I won't make any claims here, but I will say that it's very interesting that a book that was written 2,000 years ago gives us the precise antidote to combat this particular way of thinking about the world. And it is, in fact, that worldview that created the fertile ground for the intellectual groundwork to be laid to create this situation. So that's fascinating in and of itself. I won't elaborate on that too much other than to say you should listen to some stuff Douglas Murray has said about the way that Western civilization created the unique conditions to be able to challenge itself, and the world that we live in is one of Western civilization, and the reason everything seems so messed up right now is because that worldview is what changed, and it didn't happen like overnight, even though it did. It happened slowly at first, and then all at once, right? But this kind of goes into the backstory of that, and Patrick Wood, he's a guy that's been doing this kind of stuff. I think he got to start with the guy's name escapes me right now, Anthony Sutton. And they did a bunch of books on what is called the Trilateral Commission and the way this kind of like power center source created itself and made itself this all-powerful organization in order to determine the way that the world was going to unfold. And they've had people in positions of power across many different institutions, whether they be banking or media or what have you. Important key institutions have always included these members, people that sat on the Trilateral Commission, attended Trilateral Commission meetings, and shared this kind of way of thinking about the world, this worldview, which incidentally flies in the face, in my personal opinion, of what the Christian and Western worldview is. Now, is it necessarily nefarious? I think so. I think it is because it's obsessed with cracking the reality that we live in if you were to take them at their word. I don't necessarily. I think it's actually a power play for control of all things, and it's mostly based in a worldview that I always call misanthropic Malthusian, meaning that they think that there's too many people on the planet and there's too many people using too many resources, and this is actually a threat to, as I see it, what they believe is their stuff. So they don't have very much faith in humanity, and they believe that if you can control humanity properly, that they'll still get all the benefits of civilization, um, without any of the concerns that bother them, which typically tends to be people that don't bow down to them and their way of thinking about things. Which is to say that it's a largely paternalistic, safetyism based worldview that just tries to it starts to try to control all the different moving parts because it's monopolistic in the way that it has unfolded itself. But again, like I said, it's safetyism based, it's paternalism based, but it tries to not let things get out of control. And if all things can be monitored and all things can be measured, then presumably all things can be controlled as well. And this is an idea that goes back to social psychologists like B.F. Skinner, who were very much interested in what makes human beings tick under the hood, as it were, in their brains. And they tried to come up with ways to shape social society, and they've been largely successful. I mean, this started way back in the early 1900s with guys like that wrote Propaganda, the nephew of Sigmund Freud, again, whose name is escaping me. I'm not entirely prepared for this. I just wanted to go online. I had a few minutes and I thought I would. I give too much preamble. But basically, this book says when transhumanism met technocracy, technocracy is this idea that engineers will do a better job of controlling the world and all its various machinations. They'll do a better job than silly politicians who don't really mean what they say or say what they mean, and they just do things to kind of like win votes from people, and people are largely silly, so they don't know what they want for themselves, and they're largely self-interested and selfish, and capitalism only enables and empowers this situation, and they need to disempower it. Let's try this. Get down here so we can be a little more friendly here. They don't want. It's funny too, because these people live in this world where obviously they have access to things that they wish to deny to other people, or if you believe what they say, guys like Larry Fink at BlackRock, what they're saying is they think that the Fourth Industrial Revolution is going to be this moment at which, if you read the book of the same name by Klaus Schwab, written in 2016, which I have, it says that we're about to hit this tipping point where technology is going to take out a lot of people's jobs, and people will be made irrelevant and more or less redundant in the workforce. All the things that we could have done before will be automated and or algorithmed and or replacing human beings with artificial intelligence that they don't need to pay. The early adopters of this technology will win this kind of war that's happening in their estimation. So basically, long story short, a handful of people are going to own all the things, and even though they make it sound like it's, oh, well, since these people are going to be disenfranchised and they're going to be out in the cold, and we need to spread equity and equality, and we need to make sure that these people have something to live with, and we need to have universal basic income, and we need to have universal health care. But the subtext of all that stuff is what I keep trying to get people to understand is, like, where does money come from? Where does the idea of money and capitalism come from? Okay? Money comes from taxing productive income. Governments tax their citizens based on the things that they use. And also based on the jobs that they do and their income for doing these kind of like things in society that are no longer going to be. Should we go outside? Let's go outside. These things in society that are no longer going to be viable. the whole market economy system is about to break down. It's on its last legs. I'm not, and that's not just me kind of like coming up with that concept. They came up with this concept, and a key part of that book is like, what do we do with all the people that aren't going to have any jobs? We don't want them to revolt, right? So if you don't want them to revolt, you have to hand them things that are going to keep them happy, like, and satiated, like Yuval Harari said to a crowd at the WF, I think in 2020. Well, you know, we'll give them drugs and we'll give them video games and they'll be happy. Would you be happy with just with drugs and video games? B.F. Skinner might have thought so. So the point is that if everybody loses their jobs, the thing that propped up governments prior in this prior market system that we were sort of semi-living under, even as corrupted as it was, is it at least kind of like gave money to governments, so that governments would move the money around based on the priorities of the government that was put in by the people that elected them via majority, whatever. Only they're not going to get their money from those people anymore, because those people are being made irrelevant, redundant, the new useless class, again to quote Yuval Harari. And so that new useless class is useless because they don't provide anything of value. And so the question then becomes, well, where does the money come from? The money then comes from the companies that own all of the stuff and produce all the goods needed for the economy. And it's not even the economy anymore at that point. It's just economizing, right? You need to have a certain level of sustainable goods and services for people who will own nothing and be happy. Is it starting to make sense? And they will need to find some way to make sure that it's all equitable. And so you hear all of this stuff. Basically, countries and these large stakeholder capitalism model partners are going to come to all these conclusions about how people and goods and services should be distributed equally based upon historical ideas. So that's how that's how the goods and services are going to move from country to country, in my personal opinion. There's going to be a rebalancing. People that have things, they're not just going to take things from people. There will be people that have some, even though people are going to be disenfranchised and they're going to be taken out of jobs and things like this, there's still going to be people that have generational wealth. They have money, because goods and services are going to become less expensive because they need to bring down the price point in order to be able to service everyone in the same kind of way. So it's going to be like this new circular economy, this new rental economy, whatever. But they're also pairing it with this idea that the fourth industrial revolution is going to bring us all these amazing advancements in technology. And they too are going to revolutionize a lot of things, hence revolution. But the question is, how do they think they're going to get there? And what mindset prompted them to believe that this thing was even possible? Well, the mindset is contained within this book, and it started in Rio in 1992. So what is that mindset that I'm talking about? It was early on in the world of molecular biology and the attempt to back engineer it that they started to believe that they would be able to create essentially new things out of nothing, right? If they get this technology good enough, they'll be able to create, who knows, new life forms, new products. This is what brought us into the world of genetic engineering and this idea that all these large companies like your Monsanto and stuff poured stuff into genetically modified seeds where they're engineering them to be better or more resilient or whatever it is the selling push is. Often it doesn't really work out that way, unfortunately. But it doesn't matter because these large companies have these large ideas about the future and people invest in those ideas. And that is essentially what happened here in 1992 in Rio. And all of these people and all these kind of like superficially oriented people who really believe more in the bureaucracy than they do in any kind of like real principles in their own lives. And they believe in this revolution that's coming. They believe that we as humans are just getting more and more clever, and we're getting really good with engineering things, and oh my goodness, the future is just going to be like this evolutionary step forward, and we're going to become transhumans and maybe even live forever and cure all diseases and all this kind of stuff. That you should have heard all of this kind of stuff by now. If you don't, man, you are not paying attention at all. But that's more or less what's been going on. It's been all over the covers of Time magazine and really important magazines and newspapers, and they talk about it in the media endlessly, and that's more or less where we're at. And that kind of stuff also, just like, it's really heavy at the WEF. And again, the WEF is nothing more than a collection of like the largest multinational corporations in the world, who all kind of have this vision for the future, the fourth industrial revolution vision. But it's based on this idea that there is nothing beyond the material that can be understood. And it's also based in some other kind of concepts. One, that artificial intelligence is becoming this very powerful thing, and that we're going to eventually, sometime in the very near future, and this one's really hard to take, because, you know, if you've been watching what's been going on with artificial intelligence and ChatGPT and these kinds of things, and all the amazing illustration programs that they're coming up with, they're doing some pretty wild stuff. Like, it can't be denied. The question is it just taking all the information that's been fed into the computer and kind of like spitting it out in an algorithmic way that gives it the appearance of a kind of sentience, thus passing the Turing test, which is the test that says, oh, all things can be made, or eventually technology is going to take us to a place where these computer bots, or whatever you want to call them, these contained kind of like programs that have a kind of like a brain. In this case, they're using the large language model, LLMs. And it does really incredible stuff. But does it produce anything original? That's the question. I don't think it is capable of producing anything original. And all the people that say that we're about to hit this point, called the singularity, popularized by Ray Kurzweil, the current futurist at Google or Alphabet, whatever you want to call it, he believes this is going to be the case. I think I just heard him say, oh, geez. I think I heard him just say within the next decade or so. So the singularity is the point at which artificial intelligence becomes, quote unquote, sentient, meaning that it has its own kind of like mind. Okay? Its own mind, thereby putting it on equal footing with human beings who previously had rights because we were bequeathed those rights by a creator, in the case of the United States. Just 1 second. Just 1 second. They're upstairs. You can come in. They're all upstairs. Your brother has to go home in just a few minutes, okay? Just let them know. Sorry about that. But again, none of this is possible if you don't believe that all things can be understood, quantified, computed, and that we are on with this evolutionary path, and that we're not the peak of evolution right now. We are the product of an evolutionary process that started with the primordial ooze, and then a couple of strikes of lightning, and then boom, you have your first single-celled amoebas, and then they learn the ability to metabolize things, which means eat, and then reproduce, which means make more of themselves. And then that, along that way, that timeline, these things somehow became intelligent. and it created everything that you see. This is the standard model of evolution, one that was come up with in the 1840s. Don't quote me on that. By Charles Darwin. Very interesting that this theory, and not only Darwin, there was another guy coming up with this kind of stuff because it's really a philosophical predisposition. They came up with this stuff over not over 100, but almost 100 years ago, and basically we've been reverse engineering all of the ways that we look at the world based on that understanding that happened almost 180 years ago, whatever. 70. And that's kind of crazy when you think about it, that we based all of our science on that, and we tried to there's this revelatory moment at which, oh no, you know what, it turns out that the ideas that were largely prevalent in the world, those of the Christian Bible on the origins of our species, which is to say that we were created in the image of the Creator. And thus, it took a couple thousand years, but then they finally decided, and this was more about the way that the world was developing than anything else, but they finally decided that human beings should be free. And that freedom was the best thing because human rights, the entire concept of human rights was born out of this idea that we were created in the image of God. Because if we're not created in the image of God, if we're created just out of like some accidental process in the universe, well then it's perfectly understandable to say that that thing can be back engineered, and then you can create new forms of life, even though they've never done it. They've never done it to this date. I wrote a Substack. You can find my Substack at Andrew Corner, Substack, whatever. The most recent one I did was a crack at trying to make sense of what this reality is. And I'm not sure what it is. I have no idea. But I know that the world that we live in has these kind of starting points, principal points. And one of them is this evolutionary theory. And I don't believe it. I don't believe it because it's not what they say it is. And I just posted a video this morning on my Facebook from a guy named James Tour, is that his name? Sorry, forgive me. Expedia. Forgive me. Man, they're really pushing this YouTube stuff and trying to like piss us off with commercials, aren't they? So that we'll sign up for the YouTube thing and hand over our carbon credits or whatever. And that's what's going on. They're changing the system. I keep trying to talk to people about this. It's like, okay, it's Dr. James Troy. They're changing the system. This isn't just like some thing that's happening. They're literally attempting to change the system, and they started with the premise in this book in 1992 that explains how that happened. And it only happens this way if you believe the model of evolution that was again come up with 70 years ago or whatever. That's very interesting. When transhumanism met technocracy. In 1992, the UN Convention on Biological Diversity was conducted simultaneously with the Agenda 21 conference, whose full name was the UN Conference on Economic Development, or UNCED. Both were held in Rio de Janeiro, and both were sponsored by the United Nations Environmental Program, UNEP, the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, UNESCO, and the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. So you have to understand, if that's your worldview, scientific materialism, that you mean something different when you say it than what most people mean. Because you're protecting essentially what are it's not life forms, because they just happen by accident. So instead, you're protecting the blueprints that provided life forms. And this is the way they were thinking about this way back then. Agenda 21 was shorthand for the agenda of the 21st century. A lot of people get that confused. They think it was like, oh, Agenda 21 was 2021, and we've already passed that. No, it was the agenda for the 21st century. Its raison d'etre, the reason for existing, was sustainable development, a resource-based economic system virtually indistinguishable from the historic Technocracy Inc. movement, which he goes through in the first half of this book. Both then and now, the UN has acted as the global agent, spreading this contagious ideology around the world. Now, it's important to understand that Patrick Wood has a Christian worldview, but I don't think he lets that, other than to say that what these people are doing is obviously bad, in his eyes. But if you didn't have that position to start from, you might not ever write this book, because you would just think, oh, this is just the way it is. Which is interesting. If you didn't have the Christian worldview, everything that would be going on right now would actually be the product of evolution, and therefore perfectly fine. If you don't understand that, then you can't combat it. Just saying. I'm not proselytizing to anybody. I'm not saying go out and join your local church. I went to a couple churches and I was like, man, this is such a waste of time. But like, the relationship that you can have with the concept of where humanity came from in the Christian worldview is very important in cementing yourself somewhere to start from. And that's true philosophically speaking. So you don't have to be a religious person to accept the philosophy, which is where I find myself at. According to the International Institute for Sustainable Development, the IISD, quote, sustainable development has been defined in many ways, but the most frequently quoted definition is from Our Common Future, also known as the Brundtland Report. And now this is quoting from that Brundtland Report. Sustainable development is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So now we're going from each according to his need. We're adopting a Marxist worldview, more or less, but we're incorporating it into a futurism, dynamical concept that again is based on evolution and this idea that we're going to transcend humanity. The book the IISD mentioned, Our Common Future, was published in 1987 by the United Nations. It became the blueprint for the Rio Conference that the UN sponsored 5 years later. Its author was Gro Harlem Brundtland. Hence, it's handled the Brundtland Report. It was produced by the World Commission on Environment and Development, renamed the Brundtland Commission, which she chaired. And then it goes on to talk about her. But then it talks about how there was these two guys who were actual environmentalists at this conference. And now we're going to hear about them. Believe it or not, Brundtland convinced the UN membership that this line of reasoning somehow made sense, and it was adopted as the agenda for the 21st century in 1992. However, two genuine environmentalists who participated in the Agenda 21 conference, Pratap Chatterjee, and I'm really sorry if I'm mispronouncing that, and Matthias Finger, saw through the smoke and mirrors. In their book, The Earth Brokers, published 2 years later, they noted that, quote, free trade and its promoters came to be seen as the solution to the global ecological crisis, end quote. You have to understand the mindset that these people have. So when they say global ecological crisis, they're talking about the fact that the crisis is they don't yet have all of this stuff studied, because there's an element of scientism in all of this. Obviously, you can't reject the world and take up the worldview of materialistic atheism without adding in scientism, because that's part of the evolutionary worldview. I know I'm sorry if I'm not finishing my points, but I'm just trying to get through this, and I only have a few minutes. The Earth Brokers co-authors were explicit. We argue that UNCED has boosted precisely the type of industrial development that is destructive for the environment, the planet, and its inhabitants. We see how, as a result of UNCED, the rich will get richer, the poor poor, while more and more of the planet is destroyed in the process. Well, they're right and they're wrong. Because what has happened since then was they came up with a plan, and then they had to create the conditions by which they could take back the planet from the people. The people that were everywhere using this stuff that belonged to the rich people that actually funded all of this kind of thinking. This is true. And not just the rich people, but engineers. Like, this is the stuff that created eugenics. This is the stuff that created Nazis. This kind of thinking was the genesis, if you will, of the way that the world has gone since the early part of the 1900s, since the early part of the 20th century. And it's all, like, when you go back and you look at it, it all makes perfect sense that this kind of stuff went this way because of the presuppositions. If human beings are not unique, if there's no reason that we should be protected, because really we're standing in the way of this utopian vision that they always envision, and this is a utopian vision. Agenda 2030 is a utopian vision. The 17 Sustainable Development Goals are ridiculous, and they're a utopian vision. If you don't know that, I like it, and that's the thing. Like, there are all these people that are participating in this. They must know this. But I don't think that, like, I call them useful idiots all the time because I don't really think that they really understand it. But there's things that have enhanced their desire to participate in this stuff, like the belief that evolution happened in the way that it did, and that we're going to transcend humanity, and that the fourth industrial revolution is going to happen, and it's going to put all these people out of work, and we need to worry about and also climate change, or the concept of climate change. That, look, if you don't know that climate change as it exists today is interchangeable with overpopulation, then you're not paying attention. Too many people using too much stuff. How did we get here? Asked Chatterjee and Finger. They concluded neither Brundtland nor the Secretariat nor the government's drafted plans to examine the pitfalls of free trade and industrial development. Instead, they wrote up a convention on how to, quote, develop the use of biodiversity through patents and biotechnology. Despite what UNCED purported to be its true mission was to capture and capitalize on biodiversity for the sole stake of the biotechnology industry. This fact was largely overlooked between 1992 and the Great Panic, misnamed pandemic, of 2020. In the past 2 years, though, it has become impossible to ignore the fact that the global takeover has been, from the Rio Conference on, orchestrated by elements of that very same biotechnology industry. What biodiversity really means. Transhumanism has been hiding in the shadows, coming to light in fits and starts in both preaching and practice ever since Julian Huxley first penned the word in his 1957 collection of essays. As with anything new and especially occult, transhumanism is not easy to spot until we learn what to look for. At least that's how it was for me when I first heard of transhumanism several years ago. After that, I began to see the transhumanist hand everywhere, starting with Brundtland's 1987 report, Our Common Future. Okay, so then he goes through, he's pointing out, like, if you don't know how to read this stuff, as, you can't see it. All right, flip it. If you don't know how to read this stuff as it's meant to be read, which is to say that if you're not looking at it through this worldview that they did and do, that all things can be known, and that we're just merely on an evolutionary path, one that Joe Rogan constantly brings up when he gets into his like whole new age spiel about how we're going to read each other's thoughts and it's going to be like a whole new thing. And it's like, Joe, man, calm down. Like, is there any evidence that that's ever going to happen? Do we have any evidence that's ever going to happen? Like, have we made any breakthroughs in that stuff? I know we keep hearing that we're going to. I know they've made incredible advancements in neurobiology, and that, you know, Elon Musk is coming out with his Neuralink, and all these people are basically working on reading brainwaves, and, you know, the Army's been very much involved in this stuff, and DARPA, and you know, the United States literally had the bio digital convergence thing that they put out like a year ago, and it's also like when you realize what they're thinking and what they think they're doing, it's also obvious, and you can read it in the words. It's been happening since the 80s. I'm gonna skip ahead to this part because he goes back to this stuff. Chatterjee and Finger, blah blah blah. They pointed out the Earth Summit's sleight of hand. Just one sec. Rowan, you guys, I'm gonna make dinner. It's gonna be ready in about 15 minutes, okay? Sorry. Okay. They pointed to the Earth Summit's sleight of hand by boldly declaring neither Brundtland nor the Secretariat nor the governments drafted plans to examine the pitfalls of free trade and industrial development. Instead, they wrote up a convention on how to, quote, develop the use of biodiversity through patents in biotechnology. They continued, the convention implicitly equates the diversity of life, animals and plants, to the diversity of genetic codes, for which read genetic the diversity of genetic codes for which read genetic resources. By doing so, diversity becomes something that modern science can manipulate. Finally, the convention promotes biotechnology as being, quote, essential for the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity. The main stake raised by the Biodiversity Convention is the issue of ownership and control over biological diversity. The major concern was protecting the pharmaceutical and emerging biotechnology industries. Note carefully that ownership and control over genes was not treated as a side issue, or regarded as a minor stake. It was the main issue and the main stake. So what do they think they're doing? And this, if you can't wrap your head around this, you can't follow it. We're in the biodigital convergence, and the way it's happening is these people all believe unquestionably that this stuff is the future. And what's going to happen is they're going to create these artificial intelligence programs that are going to be intelligent enough to take all of this. So when they're talking about biodiversity and they're talking about conservation, what they really mean is they want to stop the potential from any animal or plant or anything like that from being killed, not because they care about them. No, that's not right. They want the genetic code. They want a chance to sequence it. They want a chance to sequence all of it. They want to sequence all of it, all of the world, all that we know. They want to sequence it for its DNA qualities, and they want to put that into a database. And they want to be able to use the supercomputer to discern which genes do which things. And the only way to think about this is they think if they can get enough of this stuff in there, that they'll be able to pull miracles out of it. you understand what I'm saying? They think that if they just have enough data, which is why data is the new oil, they think if they have enough data, they will be able to pull out all the mysteries of the universe. They are going to be able to live forever. They're going to be able to solve any disease. And they refer to aging as a disease. I posted something from George Church, who's like the father of all this kind of stuff. Just like from a few months ago, talking about how they all know that they've gotten us to accept this gene therapy now, under the guise of making it about vaccinations, which it never was. It never was, okay? If you still believe that, you're, hopeless. You will never understand what's going on if you think that this was about vaccines. It has nothing to do with vaccines. This is a whole new leap forward. Pun intended. It's a great leap forward. And they're going to surveil everything. They're going to take all the information and they're going to run it through supercomputers, and those supercomputers are going to tell them things about the nature of reality and existence. And this is how we're going to make the next leap. But nobody asked us if we wanted this. Okay, and the way that they got us into accepting all of this stuff was basically to lie about what it was they were doing. It's obviously a lie. It's a bait and switch. And everything about our way of life, everything about the way that things work is going to change. And that's what the Great Reset is. When you read that book, you understand that that's what he's saying. When you have this mind, when you understand their mindset. Now, I don't believe that. I got into this stuff because I started thinking about what consciousness was years ago. Where does it come from? The hard problem of consciousness. Where does consciousness arise from? Is it simply just this mess of neurons and synaptic firing going on in the brain, and the electric pulses going through the synapses, and that's all there is to it? No, I don't believe that, and all the atheists do believe that, and that's why they believe that everything can be put into a supercomputer and everything can be taken out of that supercomputer. Now, here's where it goes from being materialist. Obviously, they really believe what they say, and are you kidding me? This is what they believe. When you get into the multiverse and quantum mechanics and this idea that there is this, they can build a supercomputer, and this is something that I put up when I read it in Max Tegmark's book, Life 3.0, Being Human, Life 3.0, Being Human in the Age of Artificial Intelligence. Yeah?
Are the boys in for the night?
They will be after dinner.
Okay, we only have half an hour till we have to go in.
Okay, then you guys, if they're not hungry right away, then they can have another half an hour, okay?
Can we go inside?
Yes, you guys can go inside. So they believe they're going to use this supercomputer, this quantum computer, and what it's going to do is it's going to pull these answers to all of our different questions by taking all of this data and pumping it into the computer, and that this thing is going to basically pull answers out of the ether for us, because the belief of this quantum computing theory goes that it has the potential to find all potential answers to any question, or it has the ability to be in all places at once. It's like superposition. It's in all these different multiverses at one time, and the idea is that they're going to create this computerized Ouija board to pull the correct answers out of the ether. And I don't know how else to explain that, because that's more or less what they say if you listen. And that's kind of crazy, right? They're pulling stuff out from outside of our dimension, our verse in the multiverse. And they're going to do it with computers, and those computers are going to tell us how to live our lives, and they're going to give us gifts beyond our wildest dreams, like the genie in the bottle. But don't we know about the genie in the bottle that when you request these things, there's always a catch? And that sounds like a trick that the devil would play on human beings. It would influence people to create the ability for him and his minions to step into the world. This is an occult belief. And it's not just occult, but it's sorry. The occult belief is that this is a good thing. The satanic Luciferian types, the occultist types, believe that this is ultimately a good thing, and he's going to give us all these wonderful gifts if we play along. Now, I've gone through this stuff endlessly on my Facebook page. I don't know what else to tell you. I mean, it's true that this is what they think. James Lindsay does a good job going through this stuff. And it's like, I know everything is more homework. When people just want to get to the point, get it. I want to get to the point too.
I don't have the Wi-Fi password.
Okay, give me one sec. Here. I don't have it on me. I'll have to.
Don't you remember it?
No, I don't remember it.
No, here you go.
It's very complex. He's very complex. Hunter did. Hold on.
Wait,
Oh, that's.
that's Peyton's iPad.
Yeah. Okay, let's.
See if Hunter has internet.
Hunter should have it. Shoot.
Yeah, it isn't working for Hunter.
It is?
No, it isn't.
Okay. What? What's with the iPads right now? Why are you guys both trying to play?
No, thank you.
No, he is connected, Ron.
Yes?
Oh, no, hang on.
See? I need.
Rowan. Okay. Can you ask Peyton to come here?
Is Hunter's iPad working?
Give me one second. Take these inside. I'll be right there. Yeah, 100. I'll finish up with that. That's what's going on. That's what's going on. That's what they think they're doing. And if you believe that stuff, then you don't see a problem with it. I see a problem with it. It's hubris. Okay. All right. Take it easy. How do I finish this thing?